Hello and welcome to French Philosophers React, a philosophical take on the news headlines for today, September 13th, 2024. This is an AI-generated podcast and can make mistakes. Use it for generating possible ideas, but don't rely on it as an authoritative guide to the news or to the details of French philosophy. In the news today, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has told Russian President Vladimir Putin that he can end the war in Ukraine at any time, as Putin warned that allowing Ukraine to use long-range British missiles on Russian territory would put NATO at war with Russia. Starmer was responding to Putin's threats after it was revealed that the US and UK had agreed to allow Ukraine to strike military targets inside Russia with Storm Shadow missiles. The Prime Minister is set to meet with U.S. President Joe Biden in Washington, D.C. for a foreign policy summit where they will discuss the situation in Ukraine, among other issues. So, what might French philosophers have to say about this news item? The story unfolding in Ukraine, with its intricate web of alliances, threats, and counter-threats, presents a fascinating case study for Michel Serres' concept of parasitism. In his book, The Parasite, Serres explores the idea that relationships are often built on unequal exchanges, where one entity benefits at the expense of another. Our central thesis is that the dynamic between Russia, Ukraine, and the Western powers can be seen as a form of parasitism, with each party attempting to exploit the others for their own gain. At first glance, it may seem that Putin's warnings about NATO's involvement in Ukraine are simply a manifestation of Russian aggression. However, through the lens of Serres' concept of noise, we can see that these threats also serve as a form of distraction, obscuring the underlying issues and preventing meaningful dialogue. In The Five Senses, Serres writes about the importance of understanding the world through multiple senses, rather than just one dominant perspective. By acknowledging the noise created by Putin's warnings, we can begin to peel away the layers of rhetoric and reveal the underlying power dynamics at play. One key aspect of this dynamic is the role of the Western powers, particularly the UK and US, in supplying Ukraine with military aid. On the surface, this appears to be a benevolent act, aimed at supporting a beleaguered ally against an aggressive neighbor. However, when viewed through the lens of Serres' concept of exchange, we can see that this aid also serves as a form of leverage, allowing the Western powers to exert influence over Ukraine's foreign policy and potentially even its domestic affairs. In The Natural Contract, Serres explores the idea that relationships are built on reciprocal exchanges, but these exchanges often mask deeper power imbalances. As the story highlights, Keir Starmer's statement that Putin can end the war in Ukraine at any time is a bold move, aimed at shifting the narrative and placing pressure on Russia to de-escalate. However, this move also serves as a form of translation, where one entity attempts to impose its own language and framework onto another. In Rome, the Book of Foundations, Serres explores the idea that our understanding of the world is always filtered through language and cultural norms. By recognizing the translation at work in Starmer's statement, we can see how it serves as a form of cultural imperialism, where Western values and assumptions are imposed onto the conflict. The forthcoming meeting between Starmer and Biden will likely involve discussions about the situation in Ukraine, among other issues. Through the lens of Serres' concept of assemblage, we can see that this meeting represents a moment of convergence, where multiple entities come together to negotiate and shape the future course of events. In Status, the Ambiguous Object, Serres explores the idea that objects and relationships are always in flux, subject to multiple interpretations and reinterpretations. As we reflect on the story unfolding in Ukraine, it becomes clear that the situation is far more complex than a simple tale of good versus evil or East versus West. Rather, it represents a multifaceted web of relationships, built on unequal exchanges, noise, translation, and assemblage. By recognizing these dynamics at work, we can begin to develop a more nuanced understanding of the conflict, one that acknowledges the multiple perspectives and interests involved. Ultimately, our analysis suggests that the key to resolving the crisis in Ukraine lies not in simply supporting one side or another, but rather in acknowledging and working through the complex web of relationships that underlies the conflict. By recognizing the parasitism at work, we can begin to develop more equitable exchanges, ones that take into account the multiple interests and perspectives involved. As Serres so eloquently puts it in The Birth of Physics, our understanding of the world is always subject to revision, and it is only by acknowledging this provisionality that we can truly move forward. Thank you for listening to today's episode of French Philosophers React. Be sure to come back tomorrow for more reflective takes on the day's news.